welcome to the Eagle and Child podcast. It is so great to have you with us. I am super excited for today's episode. We have a Christmas special for Christmas for you, and I have a very good friend who is no stranger to the Eagle and Child podcast, an absolute brilliant man, John Adams, who's also a missionary in Haiti. John, how are you going?
Doing well at the moment. How are you?
Good, thank you. It's so good to have you with us, and I'm super excited because today we're going to be talking about Saint Nicholas or Santa Claus. But John, I thought before we could, things have been crazy in Haiti, and being a Christmas special, I thought maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's been going on and how our listeners or viewers might be able to pray for you guys or support you guys in this Christmas period.
Sure. Yeah, Haiti's been under the government has more or less been controlled by gangs.
Crazy.
Gangs are blocking the shipment of gas at the moment, and they've been kidnapping a lot of people. There are a few foreigners still being held by gangs at the moment. They've kind of been releasing them slowly, and you still can't buy gas at a gas station here, but things are kind of slowly getting back to normal, and the government just announced some new measures today, so hopefully you'll be able to get gas again soon. But I've had to buy gas in a 60-gallon barrel on the black market for the last few months.
Wow, that's crazy, John. That's insane. Can you tell us a little bit maybe about how we can support you or how we can pray for you guys? Is there anything in particular that you guys want for the church in Haiti?
Well, just pray for financial provision. The prices of everything keep going up and up and up. I'm paying like 5 times as much to renew my legal residency here as I did last year.
Wow.
But of course that affects the people here a lot more than it affects missionaries. So just pray that God would make a way for Haiti somehow, so that life wouldn't be so incredibly hard.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you, John, and thank you so much for joining us, especially in this crazy time over there. I'm excited to talk about Saint Nicholas. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe his background, where he's from, where this idea came from? I know that, he's become a little bit of a myth and a legend as well. So who is Saint Nicholas? Where does he come from?
Right, so he's Nicholas of Myra. He's the historical basis for Santa Claus, although the Santa Claus myth is thousands of years removed from the actual man. Some people have debated whether he existed at all. Until quite recently, scholars weren't quite sure that he did. But a Dominican friar in Italy has dug up a bunch of new information and has kind of cemented the fact that he really did exist, and it's even likely that he really did attend the Council of Nicaea, which was one of the largest church councils in the early 300s. But he was a man who became known for his generosity. He also served as a bishop in what is now Turkey for decades, for about 50 years until his death. And he lived through the period of transition where Christianity went from being a minority religion reviled and persecuted by the Roman government to being the official religion of the Roman government. And so he went from being persecuted for his faith in his early life as a bishop to being basically given special status because of his position as a bishop. And he used that to accomplish a lot during his lifetime. And it's kind of amazing that we know about him at all, because he really didn't leave behind any writings. It was only over time that stories about him began to be written down, and a lot of it's enshrouded in myth, but a lot of it can be independently confirmed as well.
Wow. Amazing, John. So can you tell us, I know you just mentioned that, there's nothing written by him that's lasted or that we have, but maybe can you tell us a little bit about the events surrounding his life and what he's known for, and, these things that you talked about that can be confirmed?
Yeah, he's known for a lot of different things. He's known primarily today for his generosity. So the way his myth kind of got started is that he had a person in his neighborhood that he learned about who had fallen into deep poverty. And this man had 3 daughters, and no one would marry the daughters because of how poor they were, and the man was contemplating selling them into prostitution, which was like a last ditch resort that some people in the ancient
Wow.
world would resort
Yeah.
to. And Nicholas had inherited a large inheritance. He was his parents' only child. His parents raised him in the faith. They
Wow.
died when he was about 18, probably of a plague. And
Wow.
Nicholas was kind of skeptical of the spiritual power of wealth. He thought that the wealth could corrupt him easily. And
Wow.
so he was asking God what to do with the wealth. And when he heard about this story, he knew. And so the story goes that he basically threw a bag of gold through the window one night in the middle of the night. And when the man woke up, he found it on the floor, and it was just enough for him to get his first daughter married. And eventually, Nicholas
Aw.
came back 2 more times and gave him enough money to marry his other 2 daughters. But he did it anonymously. He would sneak off before the man could catch him. But the third time, the man was waiting in the bushes and caught him and found out who he was. And Nicholas basically said, God bless you. Please don't tell anybody that I'm the one who did this. I don't want any credit. And since we're talking about it now, 1,500 years later, 1,700 years later, you can see how that went. So.
Yes, amazing. Oh, that's so cool. And you can see the parallels there between like modern day Santa Claus and Saint Nicholas. I love that. Are there any other sort of well-known events that we know of or that we can verify?
Yes, so he lived through kind of the transition between the from being, like Christianity being a persecuted religion to Christianity being the official religion of the empire. And when he was about 30 years old, it was a time of intense persecution, and the bishop in his region I don't remember if he was arrested or killed, but they needed a new bishop. And so the leaders of the church got together and prayed about who should be the next bishop of Myra. And Nicholas, or the senior bishop rather, received a vision in the middle of the night that basically told the bishops to go pray in the church, and the first person to walk through the door is going to be named Nicholas, and he'll be the next bishop. And so, of
Wow.
course, Nicholas happens to go to church, and he's the next person to walk through the door. And they're like, "Congratulations, buddy, you got the job."
You're the bishop. That's
And
amazing.
it was probably about the worst possible time to be a bishop. I mean, like
Oh.
he was arrested and beaten right
Oh,
after,
wow.
starting his career as bishop. One of his colleagues was killed.
Wow.
One historian in the Middle Ages writes, it's hard to tell how, reliable these sources are sometimes, but one medieval historian tells us that he had wounds and scars on his body when he attended the Council of Nicaea in
Wow.
325. And it was a common thing for that to happen. It was common torture at the time to blind the right eye and cut the sinew of the left ankle.
Oh,
And so
gross.
Nicholas, he would have lived through the Great Persecution, the last big persecution under Diocletian, in which churches were basically forced to hand over copies of the scriptures. And Nicholas earned the title of confessor because although he didn't die for his faith, he refused to renounce it or hand over the scriptures to be burned. And so he survived the persecution and lived on, serving as the bishop for decades. And then in his 60s, Constantine became emperor and made stopped the persecution of Christians, made Christians favored, and basically his whole world, was very different from that point forward.
Amazing, amazing. That's incredible, John. So, how do we get to know Saint Nicholas today? So, how has this story sort of developed throughout history, and how did he become what he's known as Santa Claus today?
It was a long and strange journey. Nicholas, in his earliest days, was actually known as a patron saint of prisoners. There are multiple
Okay.
legends that concern him, that some of them probably are rooted in fact, that have to do with him as bishop standing up for people who were falsely accused of crimes.
Okay.
And even basically going into the governor's presence and calling him out for accepting bribes to kill innocent people. And that's actually somewhat plausible, because when Constantine took over, bishops were they had a lot of political power. Constantine explicitly gave them political power, probably to try to counterbalance these other governors. And so in some cases, bishops could serve as mediators. They could even serve as appellate judges, and they had the ability to overturn court decisions and things like that. And so Nicholas may have used that political power to get prisoners off the hook. He also became known as a friend of sailors. There are several stories about sailors praying to Saint Nicholas for help in the middle of storms and receiving help. And so, the Vikings in the Middle Ages, Christopher Columbus, all of these people sailed under the protection of Nicholas. Like, they would throw pieces of bread, 3 Nicholas loaves, into the ocean, hoping for a smooth voyage. There's actually a town in Haiti, on the northwest coast of Haiti, named after him because of this tradition of Nicholas being a friend of sailors, which is an amazing connection.
Wow.
So my point being, he wasn't known for the gift giving primarily for a long time. It's not quite clear when that became the primary story about him. But sometime in the 1800s, the Dutch had a tradition of celebrating St. Nicholas Day, which is December 6th. It's probably the day on which he died. And they shortened his name from St. Nicholas to Sinterklaas, and started the tradition of giving gifts to others, in emulation of the gift that St. Nicholas had given. It's a day of generosity. And then gradually that turned into Christmas shopping and stores having, replicas of St. Nicholas. And then, that turned into the whole tradition of Santa Claus through the influence of various marketing schemes and poems and advertisements in newspapers. So somehow, St. Nicholas of Myra was transformed into the jolly old elf from the North Pole.
That's crazy. Oh, amazing though. Thank you so much for telling us that story. And I love that it's still like, as we've heard of St. Nicholas sort of going and giving things in the name of Jesus Christ and as that Christian charity, I love that they're still married together today, celebrating the birth of Jesus and sort of that Christian charity, Christian giving, and Santa Claus together. So I think that's really cool. So can you tell us a little bit, John, maybe about, how does this impact us today? I know like lots of people celebrate Christmas and Santa Claus and stuff like that, but how does his life and his, the events of his life and the history of Saint Nicholas, how can that inspire and equip the church of today?
I think his story about his gift giving really stands out in church history for a number of reasons, and it's inspiring to us today. It really stood out in its time because for several reasons. First, it was an example of intentional, targeted giving. He didn't give randomly. He really thought through the needs of the people he was giving to. He thought through the need of the Father to kind of preserve his own dignity, before he gave. That's why he didn't choose to give as a big benefactor, but, basically just throw the money through the window. He stands out because he didn't see wealth as inherently unspiritual like many people of his day did, but he gave simply for love's sake. As I said, he gave anonymously, which was really uncommon in the ancient world. People loved to give in the ancient world, but they loved to have their name on things, when they gave, which is still with us today. I think a lot of we know that today as well. He stands out as a saint because he didn't do anything super spiritual. Like, there's no miracles in the story. Anybody could have done what he did. He just saw a need and he met it. And fifth, he stands out because he did it in order to help people get married. So in the context of his day, that would have been really surprising. A lot of Christians at that time saw celibacy as a higher life, as more spiritual than marriage. At the Council of Nicaea, which he may or may not have attended, one of the questions they dealt with was whether the church ought to encourage castration for the sake of the kingdom. And,
Wow.
and pretty much everybody in church history after that is saying, thank God that they decided it wasn't necessary.
Yeah. Amazing.
I mean, one of the
And
church fathers, Hilary of Poitiers, encouraged his daughter not to marry and was disappointed when she did. So that was the kind of the
crazy.
attitude. Marriage is a
Mm.
lesser life. But Nicholas intentionally gave his fortune to these women to help them get married. And that implies that he believed that marriage was more than just a concession to the weak,
Mm.
but it was an honorable state in and of itself. He could have chosen to spend his money on any cause, but he chose that one. And so, for all those reasons, he stands out in church history, and I think all of those are positive things that we can
Mm.
still hold on to today.
I love that, John. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's so fascinating and really does show and highlight the developments between like the different positions that people had in church history on different things. So, often we can sort of look back and feel like it might be a static sort of, we believe this at this point and that and whatever, but it just shows how there's a development of thought, a development of thinking and theology all the way throughout church history. And they didn't always have it right. They were just sort of figuring it out along the way, So,
Right,
yeah.
it's a big conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Awesome. So we always like to finish up, John, with some fun facts, some crazy stories, anything quirky that we know about these people. So I guess for Saint Nicholas, there must be, even throughout the myth of of Santa Claus and all this sort of stuff, there must be some fun facts that you know of. Is there anything that you can think of?
Oh, there's a lot.
Yeah.
So starting with it looks increasingly likely that Nicholas was at the Council of Nicaea. Unfortunately, it looks unlikely that one of the most entertaining stories about Nicholas at Nicaea is not true. So an apocryphal tradition says that Nicholas was so outraged at the council by Arius's blasphemy against the Trinity that he slapped him in the face. And
Yeah.
so there's a meme on Facebook you may have seen that says,
Yeah.
I came to give kids presents and punch heretics, and I'm all out of presents.
Yes.
So
That's awesome.
that's probably not true because Arius wouldn't have
Okay.
been invited to the council in the first place. He wasn't a bishop.
Yeah.
And it's not completely clear that Nicholas himself was there. So unfortunately, for my imagination, that's probably not a true story. There is another story that says
let's say it
he
was.
Yeah, let's just
pretend it was. Yeah. Yeah.
So there is another tradition that says Nicholas won over a pastor who had gone over to the Arian side by writing letters to him that kind of urged him to put his pride aside and be reconciled with the other bishops, and that he was successful. Another story about Nicholas that's interesting is that he really had a lot of political power as a bishop after the Constantinian shift, and at age 70 he decided to use that power to go after kind of the biggest religion in the area. So a few hundred years after Paul, the people in Turkey were still worshiping Artemis, or Diana of the Ephesians, this goddess who had fallen from the sky and was believed to be a goddess of fertility. And so one of his biographers, a guy named Michael the Archimandrite, says that Nicholas would go around preaching in villages and roadside markets, often at great risk to himself, since there was a lot of tension between pagans and Christians in those days. But Nicholas eventually was able to use his political leverage to get the temple of Artemis destroyed.
Wow.
So,
amazing.
It says he went inside the temple and shooed away the demons before they tore it down. But
Wow.
by doing that, obviously today, I don't know if everybody would think that was actually, a nice thing to do, the right thing to do. But Nicholas saw this as like, this is a huge perpetuator of idolatry in my region, and I'm just going to get rid of it. And it did permanently alter the spiritual landscape of the province. Artemis was never really worshipped again in that area.
Wow.
So that had a big impact. Another weird fact about him is that he died at the age of 75, and one of his biographer writes that his body, with the fragrant odor of virtue, was buried in his church. And when he says fragrant odor, it's not just a metaphor. Like shortly after his
Okay.
burial, his tomb began to ooze this kind of aromatic oil that they buried him with, and it's actually still oozing. I believe it's still oozing to the present day. It's called the myrrh of Myra, and some people
Wow.
have claimed it had healing properties. His tomb was a big pilgrimage spot in the Middle Ages. I'm not actually sure how the oil is still oozing, because another interesting fact about him is that his body is not lying today where he was buried. So he was buried over in what today would be Turkey. And shortly before the First Crusade, the Christians in the West could see that the Muslims were coming and that his town was going to be overrun and his tomb was probably going to be desecrated. And so these Crusaders did like a Navy SEAL mission into his town, dug up his body, and got out of there and
So
reburied him in the town of Bari, Italy.
Wow.
So his bones today are not where they originally were, but they only got about 75% of his bones because they were in such a hurry. And so some of the other parts of his body have been turning up in other parts of the world ever since. One of the
Of course.
skeleton. Yeah, some of his bones were donated to a Greek Orthodox church in New York City, and that church was destroyed on 9/11, September 11th
Wow.
terrorist attacks. And so part of Nicholas is no longer recoverable because of that. So.
Wow, this is insane. I may or may not have some of St. Nicholas's bones here in this office.
Really?
For a small fee of $100, you can come and visit it.
Oh, I see. You have me for a second.
Yeah, no. I absolutely don't have his bones here. No.
One more interesting thing about Nicholas is his bones were actually dug up in 1953 at the Vatican's request. And in 2004, these scientists did a 3D digital reconstruction based on his skeleton of what he would have looked like. And so anybody listening to this can just Google,
Cool.
what St. Nicholas really looked like, and you'll see, probably a pretty accurate guess. And so he definitely doesn't look like Santa Claus. He had olive skin. He was over 60 years old. He had a broken nose, which is one of the interesting things they found when they analyzed the skeleton. And it's a serious fracture. It's like right on the bridge of the nose. And it's occasioned a lot of jokes about maybe he really did get into a fist fight with Arius.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sounds legit. Absolutely. No, I was thinking maybe from persecution. Maybe that was a battle scar.
Could have been, it could have been a fracture resulting from the times that he was persecuted for his faith. But we'll probably never know.
Yeah, until we get to heaven, we can ask him that. Some people want to meet Noah, some people want to meet Paul and Moses. We are going to go talk to St. Nicholas. Awesome. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for coming on the show, John Adams, for doing our Christmas special. Thank you so much to everyone for listening to us as well, for joining us on the Eagle and Child podcast. If you want to catch John Adams on social media, John, where can they catch you?
You can follow me on Instagram, John Adams to go.
Yeah.
And I pretty much post there pretty often, and there's links to other things that I write from time to time. So that's the best place to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you to everyone joining us on the Eagle and Child podcast. We'll see you next time. Goodbye. Thanks so much for tuning into the Eagle and Child podcast. That's all from us for today. If you want to support us, you can like, subscribe, or drop us a review. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram @Eagle and Child podcast. We'll catch you next time. Much love.